I've got the easy task this morning of introducing. I don't want to ever say that you're going to introduce somebody that doesn't need an introduction. But if anybody in this crowd doesn't know who our speaker is tonight, you're in the wrong room, and you should be right over there someplace. Paul Coverdell is an old friend of this organization, one of the original friends of this organization. And in 1992, as most of you know, Georgia ran the longest Senate campaign in the history of Senate campaigns. But it took 4 elections. But good things are hard to come by, and we ended up with probably the best senator that we can possibly have. And our senior senator is working himself to a bone. I can promise you, having been around the Senate once or twice, the last week or two of his life has been hectic. One of the biggest issues when he first got up there was health care. Some folks refer to it as Hillary's health care. But Paul got together with a couple of shy people, Phil Graham and John McCain, and they went on the circuit around the country. They met with groups of people probably as small as 10 and as big as thousands. So it was a heck of a job, and they turned it. They not only took the hill, they shot the prisoners. And I think that it's really one of the great stories of history, really, and particularly history of turning around a piece of legislation that would have cost the taxpayers billions and billions of dollars, created 40 or 50 more bureaucracies, and he's still fighting these things. He has been up there this week in the repeal of more and more of the regulatory things. Your savings account in education, I think, is probably one of the greatest things coming along, and I hope we can do something with that later this year. The front lines are sometimes hard to define in the Senate. Just about the time you think you've got the enemy zeroed in and they're coming at you, they're right back there, right behind you. Well, Paul has learned all of the tricks. He's done all the things. He's the 5th ranking person in the leadership, and that's an amazing thing for a freshman senator. He's an integral part of the Senate leadership. He never slows down. He works all the time with it. We're very proud to have him with us today, and I appreciate you being here, Paul.
Rogers, I appreciate the introduction, and of course I always welcome the opportunity to join the Georgia Public Foundation, Policy Foundation, because I'm an admirer of this kind of energy and wish that we had much more of it, not only in our state but around the country. If we did, things would be, the vacuums that we struggle with would not be so immense. And I compliment you and the staff and this institution for its work. You've reminded me this morning, in addition to the weather, of the longest Senate race in American history. I wish you hadn't done that. I've not been in the Senate long. There have been 1,800 Americans there. It does provide a most unique window from which to see our great and vast land. And I have sort of been a student of, particularly in the last 2 years, of freedom. You know, I was once director of the United States Peace Corps, and it happened to be at just the time that the wall was coming down and that the barbed wire was being cut. And we were the first Americans there. And I'll never forget the faces of people who had not been free ever. They are etched in my mind. One night I decided to break away from our group, and I walked back about 5 miles into a neighborhood in Sofia, Bulgaria. It was still communist. And the thing that was so striking, as you walked past person after person, building after building, the buildings were frozen in time. Nothing had changed since the day the communists got there, just locked like a still picture. And the people never smiled. Of the hundreds of adults that I saw, I never saw a single smile. And then you come home and to the Senate, and you look at this vast land, and it comes to me that the genesis of all American glory is that we've been a free people. Everything that we are, everything we've come to be in the world is rooted in the fact that we've been free people. Free people function very differently than those that are dependents or oppressed. Free people are confident. They're optimistic. They believe in themselves. Therefore, they build and dream. I often talk of my father, who began his business career as a coal truck driver. And I've learned that if he'd been born in Poland, he would have died a coal truck driver. But he didn't. He was born in America, where he could work, save, and build. And that's exactly what he did. It's the American story. We've all heard it 1,000 times. People who are not free are avoidant, paranoid, fearful, pessimistic. So naturally, societies that are void of freedom are not builders nor dreamers. Those people function only as an attempt to survive. Now, we evoke the word freedom often, and liberty. You hear it all the time. But I don't know that we spend enough time thinking about the components of American freedom. Just what is it? My guess is that if you talk to any civics class, the description of it would be in our electoral process. They would say we are a free society because we choose our political leaders. Well, that is a component of freedom. Obviously, a dictatorship and a democracy are quite different. But there are other very important components of American freedom. One is economic. You know, we fought the War of Independence over economic freedom. There have been serious erosions, in my mind, in the last half-century in American freedom. And who we are is not because of what's in our genes. We are vulnerable to the same behavioral changes if we are denied freedom as any people in the world. And therefore, we must be cautious and vigilant about the components of freedom. Economic freedom. I mentioned my father a moment ago. He was born in 1912. Over the course of his lifetime, he kept 80% of his lifetime's paychecks. 80%. His granddaughter, my niece, has just begun her business career. If she's lucky, she will keep 40% of her lifetime paychecks. Now, the way I see it, she has half the options of her granddad. And it will affect her behavior and the way she thinks and how she approaches housing and education and who she looks to sustain her family and her dreams. 80% to 40%. A component of American freedom is safety, the protection of persons and property. If you read any state constitution, you will find in the first 3 paragraphs an allusion to the fact that the government's principal responsibility is the protection of persons and property. This is not just a function of caring. This is a premise of commerce and civil engagement among people. What do I mean? Well, think for a minute. Let's go to some portion in your mind right now to this city that is not characterized as safe. Stand there and turn around and look at the commerce that exists there. It is a picture of closed buildings, of boarded up buildings, absent of people, quiet and dangerous. That is not a component of a free society. Now go to a portion of our city that is the converse, that is considered to be safe, and look at what you see. Rising structures, new businesses, cars, shoppers, vibrance, activity. You're looking at what freedom produces: entrepreneurship, ideas, new shops, new stores, new services, growth. So you see, safety is a fundamental component of American liberty. Education. No uneducated people are free. No uneducated people are free. Our forefathers and early leaders understood this. As you moved west, every state began to build a component of public education so that we would raise up a society that was educated. Educated to manage their families, their communities, and their businesses and their commerce. People that can be free and builders. An uneducated mind is denied the fundamental premises of American citizenship, wherever that occurs. On that point, this morning, 4 out of 10 students in the United States, kindergarten through high school, are frightened. 3 out of 10 will be robbed in school. 1 out of 10 will confront a deadly weapon. 1 out of 10 students in junior high in the United States are using illicit drugs regularly. That means monthly. And 1 out of 4 high school students is doing the same. Folks, this is not an environment by which we produce the leaders of the new century and the caretakers of American liberty. The fourth stanchion of American liberty is the Constitution of the United States. This document was drawn not to protect us from foreign invasion. It was drawn by people who understood the propensity of government to control, to regulate, and to deny liberty. They were fearful of our own government. And the stanchions and the construction of the document is designed to protect us from those general natures. These were people that had seen what had happened in Europe, in their former homelands. And they set out to protect this society. For me, it's probably best stated in the First Amendment to the Bill of Rights, which guarantees all Americans the right to speak as they will, to worship, to assemble, and that is a very key component as we are here today, and to petition their government without fear. There has been erosion in each of the components that I've just described. There may be other stanchions of American liberty, but for me, in the clutter of Washington, I've boiled it down to these 4 beacons, and it makes your decisions a lot easier. First, do everything we can to keep resources in the checking accounts of American workers and families and businesses. It is unconscionable that we've come to a point that over half the earnings of a person's paycheck goes to the government. I look at it this way. If something marches through my paycheck and takes over half of what I've got, it has more to do with my life than I do. We must struggle to return working resources to working people and families. Thank you. We must dedicate ourselves to making America safe. I don't think many in our land understand that we are currently under siege by an international narcotic mafia that is the most sophisticated organized crime syndicate the United States has ever confronted. Now, all of you look like someone who saw Godfather 1, 2, or 3. Rank amateurs. Rank amateurs. The Bonanos, the Gambinos. Amateurs to what we're confronting today. And who are their victims? Children, age 8 to 14, are the primary narcotic target today. Go to any jail in America, and 7 out of 10 of the prisoners there are there because of a direct or indirect involvement with narcotics. If we're going to deny the fuel to the crime chain, we are going to have to break the back of this international mafia in our country, and we can do it. On education, I don't believe you're going to recognize public nor private education in America in 10 years. The American people will not accept a system that is graduating students that cannot care for themselves, cannot get a job, and cannot govern this country in the next century. It is unconscionable that we have high school graduates, a third of them, who cannot effectively read. You can smell it in the wind. There's a revolution coming, coalitions forming, and we are going to overturn the status quo in American education. And you can count me as one that so long as I am standing and have a breath to breathe, will be defending the premise of the Constitution of the United States. We must turn again to those principal documents, and we must certify to ourselves that we are watchful, as every generation of Americans has had to be, and willful about protecting the fundamental ingredients of American liberty, because I can assure you it is the only way the next century will be an American century. I've said here before, and I say it again, history is going to write a great deal about this generation of Americans. We are having to make incredibly difficult decisions. From time to time, certain generations have been asked for extraordinary duty. You are living in one of those generations. And I believe America is the match of the problems it faces as it comes to the new century. Keep money in checking accounts. Keep people safe, educate them, and protect the Constitution, and the American people will take it from there. Thank you. Thank you. You're very generous. Roger said you wanted to take a question or two. I'd be glad to do that. Yes, sir.
I agree wholeheartedly, Senator Coverdell, with everything you said. And one thing that disturbs me and a lot of my friends in the community I live in, Dunwoody, our current leadership, our current President of the United States, I don't think really has upheld the law of this country. I think the man is a danger to the country. And I wonder if you could give us your thoughts on the possible impeachment of President Clinton.
Sure, Sherry. Could you bring that water? I don't need this for the question. I don't think the president will be impeached. I'm not sure it would serve us well. The cynicism about American government is at an all-time high. And the soundbite policy, I don't know that the American people quite know who to believe. My inclination, now I could be wrong. I mean, there's something, I mean, you know, if we're in an era where we find a used car in a junk car lot and they open it up and have a trunk of whitewater checks and papers, it just becomes mind-boggling. And it could be that there's just something that will come forward that, like the tapes. But at this point, the likely candidates for difficulty are people around the White House, not the First Lady, not the President. And as I said, I think I'm of the mood, let's take this Congress, let's take the good-spirited people we have in government, and let's keep trying to focus on the points that I've made and turn to the future. We're 3 years away from a new administration, and focus on lifting the country up. I've come to this decision over a period of time. Watching the hearings in the Senate, I think the American people have a hard time accepting a Republican Congress attacking a Democrat president or vice versa. They don't, it's hard to know how to sort it out. The independent counsel is more credible, but I have to say, I think most Americans would join me in this. They have to have some ending. I mean, this thing's been going on for years. And when you do things that way, people begin to lose heart about it. Bottom line is, I personally don't think there will be an impeachment, and I would hope we could start turning to solutions and a new administration. Be here before the snap of a finger, really. Yes, sir.
Would you spend a couple minutes, please, talking about the future of your educational savings program?
Thank you. The education savings account is a passion of mine. What we did was we took an IRA, and we have a small IRA for upper education. Well, upper education in America is the envy of the world. It has a cost problem, but it's the envy of the world. Kindergarten through high school is a calamity. They have some great schools, but we have students that are in desperate situations. So it allows a family to save up to $2,500, and then that's after tax, and the interest buildup is tax-free if it's used for a problem or an education problem the child has. That means it will be very smart money, because it will be money guided by the family to the exact deficiency the child suffers. Math, needs a tutor, no home computer, a learning disability, dyslexia, whatever. It takes the money and puts it right on the target. It has another unique feature in that it will allow sponsors to contribute to the account, and the imagination goes wild with that. An employer, a neighbor, an aunt, grandparent, friend, a union, a civic organization, a church, you name it. And so what will happen is it begins to focus the family on the child's education mentally. It brings the community and the workplace to the child's education, and everybody wins. Everybody. Public education, private education, families, the children. We already estimate that half the families in America will use the accounts, and about 20 to 25 million children. It will be the single largest infusion of smart money behind education in a decade. The President is opposing it on the premise that a statistically insignificant number of people will use the account to change from a public to a private school. It is incredulous to me that he would deny 10.8 million families in public education the opportunity to use the account. 70% of the money will go to support public education, and 70% of the money will go to families $75,000 or less. Ultimately, we're going to win this battle. You could tell by the other side filibustering me in the Senate 2 weeks ago that they're not going to make it. Come February, we'll pass it in the Senate. The President and I will meet, and I have a belief, as does my colleague on the other side of the aisle, Senator Torselli of New Jersey, that the President, in the end, will sign this legislation. He's been spun by his own spinmeisters, who argued that it was a voucher, and it's not. Thanks for the question. Richard, how are you?
As I look around the room, this question doesn't affect too many people yet, because there aren't that many gray hairs, but eventually it will. In the budget bill that was passed in the past session, Section 4507, I believe, it contains a provision that limits freedom of choice of doctors for Medicare eligible people, which is a terrible provision. Somehow or another it slips past you and others. Could you explain a little bit about that and what you're going to do to get rid of it?
Steve Forbes revealed this in a way that has been somewhat confusing. The current law on Medicare denies any person in Medicare from a private payment to a doctor. That's the current law. The language you're referring to was an attempt by Senator Kyle and myself and others to change the current law to allow choice. We didn't get it done because the administration said they would veto the Balanced Budget Act if the language we inserted to provide the choice you're looking for remained. So it was removed, except for the language you're talking about, which appears to be a new constriction. It's not. It was an attempt to get rid of an old one. Subsequently, we introduced the legislation freestanding. It has a lot of support. We could not get it passed in this logjam, but it will be back before us in the spring. So there's an enormous attempt. I have to say at this point it's not very bipartisan by the Republicans to allow a doctor and a patient beyond Medicare to arrive at a private financial arrangement. You know, that question brings so many of the arguments in Washington to mind. The other side, I believe, feels that we're born evil and have to be governed good. That's why this provision is there. They assume every doctor's a crook, and that if you allow this private interaction, a dumb citizen will be taken advantage of by a crooked doctor. We believe, based on American liberty and what we've achieved over the last 200 years, that the citizen is generally smart enough to make the decision about whether this is a good or bad deal, and that most doctors have taken the Hippocratic Oath and are good people. You only have to govern the oddity, not all of us. And that is a classic example of the differences that are being debated in Washington. Yes, sir.
Senator, would you care to comment on the current crisis with Iraq?
Well, we were talking at our table here about it. I remember talking to President Bush on the eve of the war. It was real interesting. It was a prophetic phone call. He said, "Paul, I know what I have to do, and there's no doubt in my mind." And days later, of course, the invasion had been launched. It was successful because an unbelievable coalition of the world had been brought together and aligned against this evil force. Saddam is a brilliant evil force, and he continues to test the fragility of the coalition. He did it in northern Iraq, and he's doing it today. Because he knows our focus is on commerce and other matters. And the reason he keeps coming back is that he's testing its resolve. From my point of view, the President's ultimate task here is to keep that coalition firm and solid and stare Saddam down. If they ever let Saddam out of that box, we will rue the day. If Saddam Hussein ever has in his hand a button to a weapon of mass destruction, the world will be changed, and not for the better. We thought, and the CIA had told us, that Saddam was 10 years from a nuclear weapon. It was 6 months. We were 6 months away. Look at the decision you would have made if you were sending 500,000 American men and women at the doorstep of a man who had a nuclear weapon. We better stand him down. We should exhaust every option available. But it should not be an option that he is successful in flaunting the world sanctions that were imposed by the Persian Gulf War. Unacceptable. Yes, sir.
Senator, all of our talk around the table is telling horror stories that everyone at this table has experienced with IRS. From your viewpoint in the Senate, what do you think is going to happen in the debate and legislatively with the IRS?
Well, let me begin with this premise. If we've come to a point that you need, any citizen requires an accountant of some sort to do the tax return, and then an attorney to defend him from what the accountant did, we have a problem. IRS, in the sequence of events, will be curtailed if we are successful in reversing the burden of proof so that they function as any other citizen. They have to prove it. They can't come down on you and make you prove you're innocent. That will be a huge fundamental change. And then the second sequence will be the overhaul of the tax system, which is coming. The American people, like on education, are going to demand it. And whether it be a simplified flat tax or consumption tax, no one could predict right now. I do have a warning. Do not be for a flat consumption tax if there is still an income tax. Because if you do, you'll have both. Last question back here. Hey, Reverend. Just fine.
I'm very disturbed over, I think most of us are, the morality issue, and especially education. I've seen something in 3 counties in the past 45 days I have never seen a high school. 2 boys walking down the hall, wishing and holding hands. Then I turn around and see the President of the United States attending a gay activity. What in the world, Senator, I know I got answers, is coming to being in this country. And what can we as citizens do to straighten out our education and our children? Because you know that I fight for children.
Well, I'll go back to the premise a moment ago. About a year ago, Senator Dole and I were sparring with one another, and I said the institution that was having the most profound effect on the American family is not Hollywood. It's Uncle Sam. And if there were a graph behind me here, and this were 1950 and this 1990, and you tracked the financial burden on American families from 50 to 90, of course it would just skyrocket. It goes from 2 cents at the federal level to 25 cents on the dollar. And then you put over that an overlay of decisions families were making about who was going to be in the workplace. And every time we ratcheted up the economic pressure on the family, thousands of additional American families made new decisions about where they were going to earn their income. And we've come to a point that not only are both spouses working, but both spouses are working, sometimes the teenage children, and some of those spouses, about 20% of them, have 2 jobs. And teenage suicide has quadrupled, and teenage pregnancy has quadrupled. And we've built a situation where the functions of managing the American family have been made inordinately difficult. And so if we are conscious of that, I don't think you have to preach to families. I think you have to give them the resources to do the things we expect them to do. And then with moral leadership and community role models and working together, they will. They have in the past, and they will again. But if we continue to ratchet their resources down, like I said earlier, 47 cents on the dollar. Okay, an average family in Georgia makes about $45,000. Now take over half of that away, and what's left? How would you like to run your family on that? It's almost impossible. And so we should not be surprised that we are creating certain dysfunctions among America's middle class. Well, you all have been just inordinately patient and polite, and I appreciate it very much. It's always good to work. Thank you.